Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Brando. Listen, I know, I said last time every single Sunday I would be coming back at you, but you know what? Things happen. I was gonna redo the entire YouTube studio. I ordered a bunch of things and, well, delays happened. So I threw this together and honestly, I'm kind of liking it a little bit better. You guys let me know. But also, today's video, we are going to be talking about the Ken and Barbie killers. So if you don't know who that is, we're going to be talking about Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. This story hits home for me because unfortunately where one of the victims were found was in Burlington, Ontario, where I grew up for about 8 years of my life, and where her body was found was maybe 5 minutes from my home. So I did a lot of research on this one. We're gonna be diving, there's that streetcar again. We're gonna be diving into this quite a bit. I've got a lot of information to talk about. And this one just boils my blood. It's, words don't even describe it. So we're gonna jump into that today. Also, if you guys like this type of content, you know, crime documentaries, talking about serial killers, I will be getting back to paranormal investigations soon, but consider subscribing, or if you're one of those secret viewers, by all means, welcome to the channel. But without further ado, guys, let's get into this. I'm also very sad because I ran out of Keurig cups for my coffee, and we're drinking really old, stale green tea. So cheers, guys. Also, guys, I just want to say this before we jump into it. There are certain words that I'm going to replace in today's video because I just don't want to say them on YouTube. So for certain cases where I'm explaining what happened, I might use the word assault in replace of the R word. So just be cautious of that as we're going through this, because I don't feel like it's a good thing to be saying that on YouTube. But without further ado, let's jump into this. Alright, so let's talk about these assholes. Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka are notorious Canadian criminals responsible for a series of horrific assaults and murders in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Their case is often referred to as the Ken and Barbie killers, basically because of their good looks, and also they seemed like a very normal couple. It shocked the world because of the brutality of the crimes, as well as the complicated dynamic between the two. And was it ever complicated? Just wait till we get into it. I want to start things off with talking a little bit about Paul Bernardo's early life and some of the crimes that he did before Karla even got into the picture, because this piece of shit, he deserves where he is. Paul Bernardo was born on August 27th in 1964 in Scarborough, Ontario. I actually lived in Scarborough, Ontario for a short period of time. Shout out Scarborough. Now, his early life was troubled, to say the least. His father was accused of child assault, and his family relationship was interesting. There was a lot of, they were very estranged, let's put it that way. Now, Bernardo portrayed himself as charming. He was also very successful on the outside. In his late teens, early 20s, that's when he really started displaying some disturbing, sadistic, sexual tendencies. By 1987, Bernardo had embarked on a spree of essay assaults throughout the Toronto suburb of Scarborough, and he got himself a very famous nickname. Over the next few years, in the late 80s, early 90s, he committed numerous essay assaults, preying on young women. Now, despite police efforts and also including DNA collection, Bernardo was not immediately caught, and his crimes kind of went under the radar for several years. The next asshole on the list is Karla Homolka. She was born on May 4th in 1970 in Port Credit, Ontario. Now, she grew up in a seemingly normal middle-class family. She was described as bright and outgoing. She actually worked as a veterinarian assistant and seemed to have a stable future ahead of her. What happened? In 1987, when Karla was just 17 years old, that is when she met Paul Bernardo, and he was 23 at the time. They quickly developed a relationship, and it was far from normal. This is where things take a turn. Bernardo had become obsessed with Karla's sister, Tammy Homolka. And then he proceeded to pressure Karla into giving him Tammy's virginity as a gift. Now on December 23rd, a day before Christmas Eve on 1990, Karla and Paul had drugged Tammy using Halocene, a sedative Karla had stolen from the veterinarian clinic that she worked at. They had also used halothene, which is an anesthetic, to further drug her. Tammy was completely unconscious, and that is when Paul proceeded to assault her. If that's not disturbing enough, he did this all while Karla was participating, holding the drug-soaked cloth over Tammy's mouth. Now we know this because the sick psychopaths that they are videotaped the entire thing, showing Karla and Paul assaulting, abusing Tammy while she was completely unconscious. Now, during the attack, Tammy began to vomit and choke. And instead of calling for help immediately, like any normal person would do, I mean, no normal person's gonna drug their sister the way they do, I digress, they cleaned up the crime scene, redressed Tammy, and then they called 911. Now, when paramedics arrived, they found Tammy unresponsive, and she was pronounced dead at the hospital. Now, you would think when the police arrived and they see the scene, and I would like to assume an autopsy was done. They could have seen that she was assaulted the way she was, put two and two together, but no. And despite the suspicious circumstances surrounding her death, the official ruling is that Tammy had died from an accidental choking from her own vomit due to alcohol intoxication. So the police just accepted this explanation and no further investigation took place at the time. Thank you, police. I mean, I'm sorry. I know, I wasn't there. We don't know the evidence that they had at the time, but come on. And Tammy's death allowed Paul and Karla to avoid justice. And this event marked the beginning of their horrific crime spree, and unfortunately, the two victims that followed. Our first victim's name is Leslie Mahaffey, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the last name incorrectly. Leslie had been locked out of her home for missing curfew and was sitting outside when Bernardo and Homolka approached her. Now, I want to stress, this was different times. She had amazing parents, and my heart goes out to the victims' families in all of this. And I cannot imagine as parents being in that situation. It was very normal for parents to do things like this in the early 90s. Like I said, I can't stress enough, it was a very, very different time. Now, what Paul and Karla did is they lured Leslie into the car. They took her back to their home and began what would be a nightmarish ordeal. Over the next 24 hours, Leslie was repeatedly assaulted and tortured by both Paul and Karla. And these sick fucks videotaped the entire thing. And the videotapes clearly show Karla's full participation, and that's important later. Now, it is unclear whether she was strangled or drugged to death, but after killing Leslie, Bernardo proceeded to dismember her using a circular saw. Both him and Karla encased her remains in cement blocks, which they dumped into Lake Gibson in St. Catharines. The cement blocks, which contained Leslie's remains, were later discovered by a fisherman on June 29, 1991, just 2 weeks after her abduction. I can't lie, guys, that was a hard one to read. I had to do that a couple of times. She was 14. Imagine the life she could have had, that poor girl, that poor family. I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag early. I'm sure you guys know about the case, but to think that that bitch is walking free, it's not right. It really isn't right. Our justice system, that's not justice. She only got 12 years, I think it was. We'll get to it, but it's just she should be spending eternity behind bars and rotting in hell for what she did. Our next victim is Christian French. Less than a year later, on April of 1992, Paul and Karla struck again. This time, they abducted 15-year-old Christian French in broad daylight. Christian was walking home from school in St. Catharines when the couple spotted her. Karla exited the car with a map while Paul snuck up behind her and forced her into their vehicle. So here's a tip, don't help strangers. Stranger, danger. That was always my motto as a kid. If I didn't know you, goodbye. But not her fault. Different times, she was just trying to be helpful. Bless her soul. Like, fuck. Kristen was taken to Paul and Karla's home, where she was subject to 3 days of brutal torture and assault. And like Leslie, these monsters videotaped the entire thing. Kristen, just like Leslie, fought back and tried to gather as much information as possible about her captors in an attempt to help police, but tragically she couldn't escape. And we know this because of the videotapes. On April 19th, 1992, after days of horrific abuse, torture, and so on, Kristen was murdered. Her body was found laying in a ditch in Burlington, Ontario. Unlike Leslie, Kristen's body was not dismembered, though it showed clear evidence of extreme torture. Paul Bernardo had been under investigation for his role in the Scarborough assaults for some time. Now in 1990, as I mentioned earlier, DNA samples were taken from Paul Bernardo, but due to the backlog in testing, they hadn't been processed immediately. By the early 1990s, however, his DNA was finally linked to several of the unsolved Scarborough assaults. Meanwhile, Karla's relationship with Bernardo had begun to deteriorate. Paul had become increasingly abusive towards Karla, and in January of 1993, after a particularly violent beating, Karla had left Paul and she ended up moving in with her family. And at this point, fearing for her safety, and probably the fact that police were closing in on Paul, Karla went to the police and started working with authorities. In February of 1993, Karla Homolka struck a plea deal with prosecutors in exchange for her testimony against Paul. She claimed that she had been a battered and manipulated spouse, forced to participate in the assaults and the murders under duress. Now, as part of her plea bargain, Karla was only sentenced to 12 years in prison for manslaughter, which is unbelievable. At the time of the plea deal, the police had not yet found the videotapes which documented the full extent to Karla's involvement in the assaults and murders. And in my opinion, bring that bitch back into court. I don't think so. Like, that is so unacceptable. When these tapes were later discovered, they showed that Karla had been fully active and a willing participant of all the crimes, contradicting her earlier story as being a poor, helpless victim. However, and unacceptable in my books, the deal had already been made and her sentence could not be changed. How fucked up is that? You have the evidence right there. I don't care that the deal was already made. Bernardo was arrested in February of 1993 and was charged with multiple counts of murder, essay assaults, and kidnapping. During the trial in 1995, the videotapes of the assaults were used as key evidence. Now, the tapes were never shown to the public, but they did show the brutal murder of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French. Bernardo was convicted of the murders of Leslie Mahaffey and Kristen French, as well as a number of assaults from the Scarborough days. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for at least 25 years. Additionally, he was declared a dangerous offender, which makes it unlikely he will ever be released from prison. As if that hasn't boiled your blood already, let's talk about Karla's release. Karla Homolka was released from prison in July of 2005, which sparked widespread outrage and controversy in Canada. No shit. Let's go through some of those key details of her release. Karla Homolka served a full 12-year sentence for manslaughter as part of the plea deal that she made with prosecutors in exchange for her testimony against then-husband Paul Bernardo. While in prison, Karla received psychological treatment, and reports indicated that she maintained good behavior throughout her incarceration. Upon her release, Karla was granted freedom, but was placed under several restrictive conditions. The first condition being mandatory reporting. Karla had to regularly report her whereabouts to police at all times. The next being supervised meetings. Karla was required to notify authorities if she intended to meet anybody under the age of 16, particularly to prevent her from having unsupervised access to minors. First of all, that shouldn't even have been a condition. That should have been a non-negotiable. You are not allowed to have any contact with anybody under the age of 18. How about that? But no, we'll do 16 and you just gotta tell us about it. Again, makes no sense. Restricted travel. Her moments were closely monitored and she had to inform authorities if she planned to take a trip out of province, for example. Contact restrictions. She was prohibited from contacting the families of the victims or reaching out to Paul Bernardo. And despite these measures, you ready for this one? She had the audacity to appeal the conditions, arguing that they infringed upon her freedoms. Bitch, you should be locked in a cell rotting till the day you die, inflict upon your freedoms. Give me a break. And lo and behold, in 2007, the Quebec court system ruled that these conditions were no longer necessary, citing that she had served her sentence and was entitled to her freedom under the law. We all know the justice system is a complete mess, right? Like, that is a whole other video. So I get what they're saying there, but like, come on, ridiculous. As a result, the court lifted all conditions and Karla is now a fully free woman, free to live her life without any legal supervision. Now, following her release, Karla did change her name to Leanne. It's a French last name. I don't want to mispronounce it. I'm going to butcher it. But some state that she actually uses the alias as Leanne Taylor, I believe it's pronounced, which is after one of her favorite authors. Now, she initially tried to live a low profile to avoid, public scrutiny, moving to the province of Quebec in Canada. Now, despite her efforts to stay out of the public eye, and in my opinion, I hope you find a hole and crawl into it and stay there for the rest of your life, the media and general public continued to track her whereabouts. Any news of her life after prison generated significant interest and outrage. It gets worse, guys. Hear this part. In 2007, she got married to the brother of the prison lawyer. The couple had not one, not two, 3 children together. Obviously, this news caused public uproar and just outrage, particularly because of her involvement of the horrific crimes against her sister as well as Leslie and Christian. The idea that she is now a mother raising children shocked many Canadians and frankly anybody who followed this case. Despite her attempts to live anonymously, Karla's presence continued to make headlines whenever she was found living in a new community. Now in 2012, reports did claim that she had been living in the Caribbean. I remember those reports. I always thought that's where she was to this day. But actually in 2016, it was reported that she is back in Canada. And in 2017, the media confirmed that she is actually still to this day living in a suburb in Quebec, I think very close to Montreal. And you want to know the best part of it? She was volunteering at her children's elementary school. Obviously, parents expressed extreme outrage that a convicted killer with her past was allowed anywhere near their children. If I was that parent and my kid was going to that school, hold me back. Now, following the media backlash, the school had to distance themselves from her and her volunteer activities were halted. Now, I don't know if the school knew who she was. I'm gonna go and play devil's advocate here and say they didn't, because if they did, that's a whole other problem. The leniency of her sentence, especially in comparison to Paul Bernardo's life sentence, just continues to be a source of outrage. Now, the general public who was following the case, and I'm sure anybody who watches this video or any other video about these cases would agree she should have received a much, much, much harsher sentencing and punishment than she did. The families of the victims are very, very vocal about this and have shown immense anger towards her release, and rightfully so. They argue that justice had not been served, and I agree with that. They express ongoing fear and frustration that Karla was free while their loved ones are gone forever. Now, as of recent reports, Karla continues to live a low profile in Quebec. She reportedly lives under her married name and tries to maintain privacy as much as she can, although her past does continue to follow her. Now, Paul Bernardo remains in prison to this day, serving his life sentence. He has been denied parole multiple times, and it is widely believed that he will never be released due to the heinous nature of his crimes and the fact that he has been labeled a dangerous offender. The crimes committed by Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka left a permanent scar on Canadian society. As I said, the media often refers to them as the Ken and Barbie killers because of their good looks and seemingly perfect outward appearance. Karla Homolka's plea deal, often referred to as the deal with the devil, remains a controversial aspect of the case. The story of Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka is one of the darkest chapters in Canadian criminal history. While Bernardo remains behind bars, Homolka's freedom continues to haunt those who believe justice had not been fully served for the victims Leslie Mahaffey, Christian French, and Tammy Homolka. Their lives were tragically cut short by the couple's horrific actions. These were three beautiful young women who tragically lost their lives at the hands of these monsters, and we will never forget them. I hope Bernardo rots in prison for the rest of his life, and I hope every waking second that Karla is alive, she remembers what she did. And I hope it follows her for the rest of her life. To the families of the victims, my heart goes out to you. And with that, guys, that is the story of the Ken and Barbie killers. Well, there you guys have it. That's the story of the Ken and Barbie killers. I know that was a lot. Comment down below. Let me know what you guys think of the video. If you got any ideas for other serial killers that you would like me to research and do a video on, please let me know down below. This one really hits home. I was born in '94, but growing up in Burlington, I remember hearing about this story all the time. It definitely scars a community when something like this happens right in your own backyard. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, and I will see you guys soon, I promise. I'm not gonna sit here and be like, oh, I'll see you next Sunday. The plan is to see you next Sunday. But like I said, I got a couple of ideas we're gonna be working on, and let me know what you guys think of the new set. My battery died, so the light, it's not working right now, but